what is the best version of myself when I when I am honest about something that maybe has a negative impact on somebody, but I'm honest, so I get to stay in integrity. This is always when somebody gives me such a broad, like, give me this, and I know that's what everybody's like, you need to have it narrowed down so you can give a really specific. My life is not specific. I don't function in a specific. But the broad picture of what I do, I actually do a couple of things. My day-to-day job, I am actually on active duty orders with the military right now. So that's the job that is my income at the moment. My passion, and part of that is what I do in the military, is I serve people. And that is what I want to do. I kind of brand myself as a coach. It's not necessarily where I want to be, but the vision for what I want to create is actually to free people. And that's why I do better with specific. Can you bring me back into more where you want to be? Because I go a little
Yeah,
too
for sure.
broad.
Well, no, that's okay. So let's start by thank you for your service, because it's an honor to sit down and have this conversation with someone who is willing to, literally put their life on the line and put others ahead of themselves. So I'd be remiss if we didn't start there by thanking you for that, because that's a big deal. So let me start by saying this. Is there a specific life event or circumstance that maybe brought you to this sense of, hey, I need to go out and serve and I want to help bring people to this feeling of freedom? Let's start with that.
I would say yes, there's two. I'm going to go with the more palatable one first.
Okay, let's do
My
it.
history with relationships actually is kind of what brought me here. Kind of looking for the self-fulfillment in other people, and getting to a place where it became very apparent that I cannot get that from another person, that the only place that is sourced from is within myself. That prompted the name of my business, Your Individual Evolution Directive. And I think you even said it when I was reading your little bio on your podcast too. It's like you spend all this time and you build something based on the idea that's sold to us by society of what life should look like. And our focus is placed externally. And you get to a point at some place in your life where it's like, I've done this, I've accomplished that, and I'm not receiving the promise that the world told me. That's not where the promise comes from. And so
Right.
through that whole journey of kind of trying to create the life that people said, and that was largely as a female, I felt like, part of that responsibility is being married, being in a relationship, that I need to be whole unto myself first. And so I am grateful to my 3 ex-husbands for the journey that they've brought me on. But through that journey, I have become very, very aware of, it's been feedback. It's been a reflection for me to understand where I'm at. And so that's what prompted this and has prompted my entire journey, and kind of delving into what I call the 4 elements of evolution and what I like to share. And I hope that the freedom that I've been able to experience through that is what I can share with other people through my existence. So, yeah.
Good. I love that. Do you want to share the less palatable version of that?
I will, and I guess you can
Okay, let's
use
do
if
it.
it's
Let's dive in. I'm here for
shareable.
it.
I started my military career in the Marine Corps as a military police officer. I loved it. I wanted to go into law enforcement. From the very beginning, I wanted to serve, and I've continued that obviously in some form or fashion. But I was raped in the Marine Corps, and from that point on, now at the age that I'm at now, it's been just less than 30 years. It's probably been like 28 years since that happened. And probably about 5 years ago was the first time that I looked back at that timeline from the time that happened. And I realized, like, all of this mess of my life, I was in a constant state of reaction to that one event that I did not look at the time. I did not look at it. I literally reacted to that event within maybe 6 months of that happening, I was married. And I think what I did is I turned for safety to a man, and I've looked for a man to make me safe and allow me to feel whole. And that has created a real internal conflict for me, because prior to that, I mean, obviously, well, I don't say obvious, I say obviously, that's not obvious, but somebody doesn't join the Marine Corps not having some degree of confidence in themselves and their ability to do things. And I think at that moment, a piece of me was broken, and I either didn't trust myself. I didn't know if I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust the world. I don't know. I existed in a state of reaction. And so then looking through that timeline, it's like marriages, jobs, all these things that when people are like, what are you doing? Honestly, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just reacting to one thing after another until it kind of came to a head in the past, I don't know, I guess maybe 5 years. I guess it would be 5 years now, where there was a hard stop for me, where it was like, wait a second, this is not working. I have got to find a different way to understand what's happening and to move forward from this that is not reactive. And I would watch people live deliberately and be so envious and not understand how to do that. And I think what we all too often do is we look at somebody and we say, they have what I want. And we try to do that exact thing, and it never works. You cannot do what somebody else does and have the same success. I mean, you can maybe mirror it. And again, going back to your example, is you did all the things that you were told this is what success looks like, but it didn't feel successful. And so that's why it's so important. It's like, how do we take those things that we're seeing? And I kind of think of them like bumpers, like we're going through life and we're kind of feeling our way through, and we're like, I like this, but how do I turn that into something that works for me personally?
Right.
And so all of that's where I am. And I'm on this podcast with you now.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that, because it's probably not a comfortable thing to share. And I'm sure that has been a journey for you to really accept over the past 30 years. So having that conversation, do you think that at this point, it is a really hard thing to say that you may ever be grateful for the experience, because obviously it's not a thing that you want to wish on anybody, but do you think now you've been able to kind of use that as an opportunity to grow from, rather than something that you're hiding and embarrassed by, or, for all those years, can't even imagine the range of emotions that it put you through, but now you're able to kind of take control of it and use it for good?
I love that you're asking that question, because I feel like you're asking questions like that are so invaluable. It's like you're walking on the edge of a blade, because there is that visceral response in me that is like, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Like you said, that's not something, like, it is, especially coming from a law enforcement background, 100% unacceptable. That is not acceptable behavior. On the flip side of that, where would I be without it? You're right. And I hate, the part of me that hates to let that come out of my mouth is the part of me that knows there are other victims, other people that have suffered at the hands, whether it's rape or something else, that they haven't journeyed to the other side of it to have that experience. Because to say this for somebody that hasn't been on that journey, it is like a kick in the teeth. I mean, it's not good. It's like, how could you ever say that? And I can appreciate that. And it's so hard. I think that's why it's so hard when you go on your own personal journey, why there aren't any words, why it's easiest, because you want to tell people that it's better, or like, you can do this, but it goes back to the idea that nobody can do the same thing. And so it's like, how can I hold space for people? And that's what I get to do in my job now, that I love. I'm religious affairs, which is a chaplain's the new word for chaplain's assistant. And there's lots of administrative, there's other things that go along with that. But my favorite part of it, every day I get to hold space for people. And that is the most rewarding thing, because I think I can tell them all day long my story and my journey and try and give them nuggets of advice. But just allowing somebody to process that in the most helpful way. Yes, to answer your question, it's hard to say, yes, thank you. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. But
Right.
I am saying, man, this life journey is bonkers. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. When you get to the other side, you're just like the little emoji with the brain exploding. It's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy how it works out when you're willing to go headlong into it.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most beautiful parts of it is it gives people permission to go through it themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Because unfortunately, these things exist in the world. Right? And as much as you or I want to wish them away, that they would never happen again to anybody, unfortunately, it's not the case. Right? There is going to be situations that people are going to find themselves in, whether it's, what you've gone through, whether it's what I went through. Like, each one sucks in its own right. Right? And you cannot say which one is worse. They all suck. Everyone's got their own journey that they have to go on, and each person's is unique to them. But for you and I to be able to sit here and say, hey, this is the thing that I went through, and this is the beauty that I was able to find in that journey. Right now, what's going to happen is there might be someone who's listening to this that had a similar experience 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Right? And of course, we can't skip the timeline, right? They have to go through the journey. The journey is a really important part of that.
Yes.
But for you and I to be able to sit here and have this conversation and say, hey, there is light on the other side of that, if you're willing to go do X, Y, and Z, right? If you talk about the 4 components of evolution, if we talk about these different things that you and I have gone through, right? It gives hope to somebody that, hey, if I'm sitting here in this life right now, and I'm listening to this podcast, and I feel like, I had this traumatic experience, again, whatever that might be, right? I'm not saying it has to be yours or mine. It could be whatever is unique to that individual, but that there is hope that mess will turn into a message, right? That test will turn into a testimony at some point if they go through this and they're willing to endure and to grow. They'll be able to see the light, and then at some point they can go back and be a light to somebody else. And I think that's a really beautiful part. And it goes back to even what we started this podcast on. Hey, there might be some background noise. There might be some things that come up because we don't lead these perfect lives. Yeah. And we could portray, we have this perfectly buttoned up podcast studio where everything is amazing. It's not totally real life. Like, yeah, I put a lot of time and energy into making this look and feel great. But on the other side of this is my bedroom right there, right? Like, there's laundry piles. There's my dog sleeping on the bed. Like, there's real life right here. But most people don't see that, and they think that, it's just this little bubble that everything is perfect inside of. And so I love how you shared that story, and it gives people permission to be real and authentic and kind of explore that journey on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's ultimately what I would hope, even you holding space for people like this, I would hope that that's the whole point, is that people have that permission and follow their own path and learn that that's okay. I just think we haven't learned how do I follow my own path? Like, that's not the message that's been told throughout life. We've been told, this is how you succeed. We haven't been told, how do I navigate my own life? And that's the hardest part.
Yeah. And it's an impossible question to answer, really, because there is no true one answer, right? Everyone has their own destination, which means they have their own journey. Yep. I can't possibly tell you how to get there, but I can give you advice on what to look for while you're on the journey, right? Everyone's got to figure out their authentic self and what their own individual journey looks like. Yep. So for someone that you might be talking to, where do you help them find their authenticity? Is it embracing their past? Is it trying to figure out their future? Like, what does the journey to authenticity look like?
Okay. I do better. I'm a very visual person. I think more in pictures than in words. So sometimes the translation into pictures, from pictures into words, doesn't come through. But that is like, that's the whole point, is it isn't an objective. In the very beginning of my book, I warn people, this isn't an answer. This is the beginning of a journey. Like, that's the whole point. And the idea is, and I do want to give credit. Like, I feel like nothing that I have drawn on, it's not necessarily original. It is from spending literally thousands and thousands of dollars trying to find answers, and realizing the similarities in things, or finding the thread that goes through all of them, that's like, okay, I kind of see how this is coming together. And now when I read stuff, I'm like, okay, I see where everything fits in. But we have this idea that, we'll just say, for instance, I'm somewhere in life that I'm unhappy with, and I want something else in life, and there is that gap in there. And I know I've seen in some things that do that. They demonstrate that. It's like, here's where I'm at, here's where I want to be, what's in between. So that's always the case. We want to get somewhere. What often happens, and I think we generally understand this in this place, what I call forgiveness, we have this identity of ourselves that is not, the only reason that we are not where we want to be is because we are literally not that person. We are this person. And so how do I get from being this person to being that person? And so there's this idea of forgiveness. We have to give certain things that have happened in life, things that we've done, things, whatever, that allow us to move away from that identity and move towards the vision of our lives. And so our vision is encapsulated predominantly in society. We're sold in the things that we want to do. And you did that. You pursued that, and you were successful in getting all the things that you want to do and have. You did it. The thing that we forget when we get there is the person that's underneath all of those doings. We look at people who are habitually wealthy, or habitually happy, or habitually peaceful. It's not because something external to them. It's because their internal state is that. Our internal state, when we're in this, living in this place of forgiveness, is not conducive to that. So if I want to experience peace, I have to be a peaceful person. I am not doing a good job of this. I feel like I'm not starting in a good starting point. Yeah, that's why pictures do.
No, I think that you are, and
Okay.
it's what makes it really complicated for people,
Yeah.
right? Because there's not one clear answer to give anybody. Right? You need to be able to find out what that unique next step is going to be, and it's individual for everyone, and that's a really uncomfortable spot. Right? You have to be willing to sit there and say, am I happy genuinely? Or am I putting on a facade of happiness? Am I doom scrolling on Instagram to fall asleep because that's the only time I feel free? Right? Am I truly happy? Do I wake up and say, thank you, God, for giving me today? Does that happen every morning? Most people, the answer is probably not. Right? And it's a really difficult thing to accept. I sort of relate it to, hey, if your tooth really hurts, but you don't go to the dentist, you're fine. It'll go away by itself. You don't want to go to the dentist, and the dentist says, hey, you have a cavity that needs to be filled, because then it's real. But if we just ignore it, it'll probably go away, right? Even though it really won't. This is the same thing that we do in a regular life when we say, I'm not really feeling super happy. I'll just medicate with food, drugs, sex. Like, you pick a thing to make you feel, quote unquote, comfortable for the day. And then next thing you know, it's 40, 50 years later and you die. This is just the journey that people go on, that they don't necessarily stop to think, hey, how do I prevent this from becoming just a pattern that I keep continuing through the rest of my life? Because it's really uncomfortable. And people don't have these conversations to say, hey, man, this is not what your life is supposed to look like. Let's take a step. Let me hold space for you. Right? Like you said it before, these conversations, you and I right now having this conversation, we are simultaneously the two least important people. We are two random people out of 8 billion people who, if people saw us on the street, most people would just keep walking. They don't know who the heck we are. But at the same time, for you and I to sit here and share our experiences for the one person listening to this right now who's going to have that little breakthrough, we are the two most important people in their life. But if we don't hold space for each other to hear our testimony, to share our experiences, right? We idolize celebrities or athletes or politicians as the most important people to learn from. And we walk past the people on the street, the people at the grocery store, our friends. We don't consider that they all have unique stories and backgrounds. If we gave them the space and grace to listen to, we might learn a thing or two.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I love, what you're talking about. And yes, it is really difficult for us to have those conversations with people, but we have to. Right. And I think that that's such a beautiful part of being able to do what you do and give people the space and grace to express themselves, even if it is messy. Right. And I think encouraging people to not feel like they need to know their own story. Right. You can just let it be a mess. Just dump it out. Right. Get around someone and just express. Right.
Yeah. That doesn't
Do you
happen.
kind of feel the same way?
I do. And actually I do. I love being present for that because it is real. And I get to see it so rarely because people are so guarded. But when it does happen, It feels, I like holding the space for people's mess. So, yeah. So
it's beautiful.
Thank you for doing
And
that.
it really is.
I appreciate that.
My pleasure. It really is a weird little privilege, to be able to have a conversation. And it doesn't have to be here on a podcast. It could be wherever. It could be a random person that you meet at the school, or it could be at wherever. Even in a 4-minute micro interaction where you just get to show up as the pure version of yourself. And I believe, hey, if you show up with your own stuff handled and you're not kind of a mess everywhere else, you've taken care of your stuff first. It allows you to show up for other people and give them space to kind of express themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing that we are missing right now in society is there aren't that many people right now who are handling their own business first and giving our friends and family space to express. So we're all just kind of walking around bottled up because we have nowhere to vent out, right? And that creates these conversations and these conflicts where now people can't find a space to express themselves and figure out who they are. I relate it a lot to cleaning out your closet. You like visual concepts, so let's consider this one. When you clean out your closet, usually, at least the way that I do it, I take everything out of the closet, you throw it on the bed, you make a big mess of a pile, right? And then you start taking things individually and putting them back one by one where they belong.
Yes.
But the initial process is you're taking a closet which is kind of messy, kind of organized, making a bigger mess somewhere else, then putting it back organized. Right? But a lot of people were afraid to make that initial mess because we don't have the space to do it.
That's true.
Does that concept kind of make sense?
I really like that visual. That really works well.
You're welcome to it. It's all yours.
I'll pass it along. I'll pass it forward. So.
Excellent. So let's talk evolution, right? So you mentioned that you've got like these 4 components of it. Can you go into a little bit about what those are and kind of how we can start to use those? Let's say now that this person we've expressed our mess, right? How do we start to evolve that into our real self?
So the cool thing about evolution is it's a feedback system. That's what I like about it. I think we sometimes forget that there's a curve. I call it like the evolutionary bell curve. And we can see this throughout history. Like there's this push for progress. There's always this push for progress. And I think of like Nikola Tesla and those people that were at the front end of it, that they didn't succeed because they were too far out ahead of everyone else. There are those people that get really stagnant and rigid in their belief systems, and those aren't sustainable either. So like any bell curve, you have this space that's functional for evolution, and it's always trying to push to something greater. And I believe that exists collectively and within each one of us. And so the discomfort that I feel like we are feeling so strongly in the world today is that evolutionary push asking us to be greater and do more. And what that looks like, I can only say for myself. I have a vision of what it would look like for the world. But as we feel that push forward, that's that traversing the space in between who we think we are and who we want to be. And it's like, how do we traverse that space in a way, and listening to the feedback that we're getting so we can do it in a very functional way. And so that's kind of, I guess, where it all comes from, is going from the idea of who we think we are, um, that really rigid idea that's like hanging on to whatever ideas you have of yourself that are becoming dysfunctional, and the part of you that's trying to push forward. And in that space that's so essential is awareness. And I generally talk about awareness first a lot of the time when it comes to evolution, is because we cannot, if we can't see something, if we aren't aware of something, if it's outside of our reality, it's pretty much useless. Like, I was talking to a friend recently that was kind of trying to decide, well, do I stay with the stable job, or do I go and do my heart's passion? Do I stay with the stable job that will allow me to have something to leave to my children, or do I spend my earnings now and enjoy life now? And that's what we're conditioned to do. We live in this dual world. We live in a world of duality, of day and night, male, female. And so we're caught in between these two choices constantly. And I asked him, I was like, why does it have to be one or the other? Because that's what our mind tells us. It's either this or that, black and white. That's the world we live in. When we drop into awareness, and there's two components I always say to awareness. There's the intention to be aware. You have to know you're turning on or off the flashlight. And then you have to be curious. And the thing I love, love, love about curiosity is it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your boundaries. So in the space of awareness, you get curious and say, what's there? And so you're being intentional about kind of broadening what you're looking at, but you still are saying, but these are my boundaries, and this is where I feel healthy and safe. And so you get curious in the space of awareness, and you begin to allow things in, so you see where your blind spots are. That's generally what it is. It's like, we don't know our blind spots. So it's like, I soften, I start paying attention, I start looking around, and I can navigate this gap better. And of course, we live in this tangible world, this physical world, where we don't control everything. And so the other element to that is surrender. There are certain things we just can't change, that won't change. And there are so many times that we get caught up and frustrated on something that's like right here, right now in the present moment, that's stopping us. That it's like, I wish this wouldn't have happened. I wish this hadn't have gone that way, or they shouldn't have done this. In that moment of surrender, it's saying, that happened. Now what? And you go back to awareness. And I return to awareness, and I go, okay, I'm still navigating this gap of where I'm at, where I want to go. What do I want to do? And so instead of saying that there's an absolute answer to anything, it's allowing for this space of receptivity to life and deliberately responding to the feedback that we're getting. And so instead of, like I said, and you've even said it, like, we can't tell anybody how to do it, but I can give you a framework that helps you navigate this in a way that is less destructive. And I don't know if somebody had handed this to me at the point of, when stuff started happening for me and I started reacting to life. I don't know if somebody had handed this to me, if I would have been able to actually utilize it. I do think, though, like you said, the holding space, that's the first part of it, is holding space for somebody to be their messy selves, and then saying, okay, how do we move from here in a way that is supportive to you, that is deliberate, that brings in awareness. So I know when I'm reacting to something, or when I'm deliberately responding, and when I understand that maybe the way somebody is treating me isn't healthy, and I actually have the choice to leave that situation. Like, there's all those things that we are reacting to and trying to control that we can't always control, but we don't always respond very well to them. So
what I'm hearing you say there is, it's sort of like the journey is the answer. So it's mostly like getting into this state of flow, right? Where it's not this on-off switch that you're going to suddenly get the answer and everything's great. but it's more like developing this system, this flow where you can get into, where you start to recognize, hey, this is where I'm at. I get this awareness. Now I can start to figure out what my next steps are, and developing that rhythm, right? That's the answer, is developing a better rhythm for the journey, not getting to the destination. So it's sort of like trying to smooth out the process of evolving, of continuing to grow and to move forward, not necessarily just getting to a destination, but the smoothness of the journey, and kind of establishing these daily disciplines or these practices to really figure out how do you continue to refine and smooth the vibration, so it's not this dramatic up and down chaotic life, but you sort of have this process dialed in.
Yes.
Am I hearing that right?
You are. And the crazy thing is, to me anyway, the way I start to visualize it, like I started to work with them kind of in a circular pattern: awareness, forgiveness, vision, surrender, and sort of feeling my way through that. But as I went deeper and deeper into awareness, what I begin to realize is you fall back into that state of awareness. You can kind of look at your life more objectively. And the interesting thing to me is that arc that we're navigating from the person we are to where we're going is, we're like, that's where I want to go. And the minute you get to that's where I want to go, there's always something else. And you're like, oh, wait, I need a new car. There's a better car out. There's, oh, there's another level to my job that I could do, or I found this nuance in my job and I want to change it and do it this way. So this idea that there is any place to go is almost comical, because the minute you get there, there's something else. And the minute you get there, there's something else. Yet we've sold this idea that there is some place to get. And almost anybody who's been there, even when they have structured their life so perfectly to get where they want to get, I think the universe definitely has a sense of humor, because inevitably the rug gets pulled out from under them. And I can't tell you how many people I've ever known that are just like, I did it the way I was supposed to do it. And
Right.
Something that's so perfectly and appropriate for their personal journey shows up in some crazy way that it's like, nope, there's more. Nope, there's more. And I have an idea of where that ultimately leads, but that's for every person to find out on their own. So yeah. It is the journey. And it sounds so cliche, it's not about the destination. It's the journey, not the destination, whatever. But man, it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely relate. I've had experiences where you kind of have this Wizard of Oz moment of, you finally get to Oz and you look behind the curtain, and the great and powerful Oz is this little tiny dude, right? When I was chasing success and I'm like, hey, I'm going to get to this pinnacle of success and I want to be surrounded by these people, right? There was a time in my life where I looked at, hey, if I'm going to be in this digital marketing space, these are the top names in the industry that are, the gods of the industry. And I was like, hey, these are the top dogs. And it got to a point where I climbed up, where I'm now in the same room and I'm looking around. I'm like, these are not the people that I want to be associated with. This is horrible, right? So you get to the top of the mountain and you look around and you're like, this is what I wanted the whole time. This is awful. But the process of the journey, I think, was really important. It also made me realize in that process of, looking at, hey, this is the destination I want to get to, realizing that, like you said, the destination is not really important because it keeps moving. Once I got there, I realized, hey, there's an even better destination further ahead. Let me continue to chase on to that one. And it doesn't look like all this, fancy, shiny stuff. It's way more pure and authentic.
Can I ask
But then you get there and you're like, hey, there's an even better version. Yeah, please.
So this is my question for you then, that I would be curious to know, if when you're examining yourself and where you started and where you are now, can you look at the qualities or the traits that you express, that you maybe expressed at the front end and where you're at now? Because I think that's the part that we sometimes forget in the vision. We get caught up in the physical part of it, but the you that understands success now, if that was taken away from you, would you have a very different belief in yourself or skill set, that it's like, no, I know, and maybe this is what resilience looks like, I don't know, but maybe like, are you fundamentally different? Because that's the point. The external world will continually change. That's why we're always chasing something external. But what I would be
Right.
curious is, can you feel a fundamental difference in yourself that is more peaceful, that is more
Yes.
loving, that...
I will answer this in the reverse bell curve. It's your evolutionary bell curve.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. The way that I understand this and the way that I feel about it is I went on this journey and I started out, let's start at birth. Okay, I started out born as a pure kid. Then eventually, society gets a hold of you and says, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. This is the expectation of you. You start to get the peer pressure from your friends. They tell you who you are. You start to believe them. You grow up and you chase these things.
Yeah.
You get to the quote unquote top or bottom, whichever way you want to look at it. You realize, hey, this is not the thing. And then you start to go on this journey where you start to peel back the layers and you get back to your authentic self. So to me right now in the space that I'm at, there isn't much to remove. This is who I am, right? There's still some things that I'm working on. I'm not perfect by any means, but at this point in my life, I'm operating as pure and authentically as I possibly can, to where, hey, it's a really freeing feeling because you don't have to worry about judgment or criticism because it's me. I would happily let the internet see my text messages and my dirty secrets because I don't have any. It's really fun to live that way where you're not afraid of people finding out your dirty laundry. I love it. It's great. It's so freeing to feel that way. But to your question, yeah, I think at this point in my life, I'm super satisfied with how I move throughout the day because success to me is not dollars in the bank account or what kind of cars in the driveway. And granted, those things are doing better now than they were when that was actually a priority. But you could take all those things away. I would gratefully accept the challenge to jump back in the valley, right? There was a time in my life where I used to curse the darkness of being thrown in a valley. And as an entrepreneur, someone who is constantly chasing the next thing, you go through these roller coaster experiences where it's very up and down. One day you're on top of the world, next day there's a huge problem and everything kind of crashes down. And now you're like, man, why me? Why am I dealing with this? And there was a time in my life where I used to curse that feeling of saying, I'm trying so hard, I'm trying to do the right thing. And it sucked until I realized for me on my journey, and this is true for me. I'm not saying it has to be true for you or for anybody else, but for me, what I realized was that is an opportunity for me to now come back, go through this because I have 100% confidence I will go through this and grow through this where I can then come back and share the story for somebody else. So I've now developed the sort of mental conditioning where, hey, I'm excited to get thrown into that valley because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to have a great story and I'm going to be able to help someone on the other side of it. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, and it does. And I think the kind of what I like to hear is what I'm pulling out from it, and what I would hope that your listeners are hearing is no longer does the external world control your internal state. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, he was one of my influences. That's one of the things that he talks about is when we can control our internal state, that's how we impact the external world. And so I think that's the fundamental thing to realize when we talk about evolving is I learn to control. I learn to control my internal state. And that is what changes the external world. And as I continue to grow and that comes out of me, that's expressed in the physical world around me, as opposed to us being subject to our physical world, which I think is where a lot of people exist now. I think social media has a lot to offer, but I think we have experienced the initial impact of diving headlong into social media in a very unconscious way. Because we're like, oh, we have this new toy. Yeah. And we have seen the impact of that by not understanding that we determine our value. When we start allowing the external world to determine our value, we suffer greatly. So I don't know. That's what I'm taking away from what you said is the excitement to me of it's like, no, I got this. I'm the center of my world and I get to control it. So
100%. And I think, to even compound on what you were saying there, the importance right now, more than ever, of not letting the outside world dictate the inside, because there are so many things that are going on. Let's just talk the news for a second in general, right? Where you are being emotionally manipulated, pro or con, regardless, you are being emotionally pulled in one direction. And when you can be so confident in who you are that you are not allowing yourself to be emotionally pulled those directions, but you're comfortable, you're calm, and you don't allow yourself to be emotionally manipulated, where you can say, hey, I don't care what you're trying to tell me. I'm not going to react right away. I'm going to stay who I am and be confident in who I am and not let your definition define me. It allows you to kind of take the step back and calmly and rationally look at things for what they are. You'll see the truth. You'll see the lie. Then you can determine your reality version of it, right? But there are so many people you look around who are constantly being triggered by their emotion. They're not in control of their life. They're not in the driver's seat. Yeah. They're letting everyone else manipulate them because they're reactionary to everything rather than being able to kind of be in control. And, I think it's a conversation that a lot of people need to start having and looking at, hey, am I actually in the driver's seat of my own life, or am I just kind of here, a bag in the wind blowing around based on whatever story I happen to see when I'm scrolling through Facebook?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's kind of the state that I like to think the more people like you, like when I see you doing what you do, and I still listen and read things. I like to think our pendulum is slowly swinging back to this idea of, I think it's a bit of a paradox to say the internal focus, because that sounds egotistical, but that idea of knowing thyself well enough to show up, like you say, authentically is as we become balanced, the world balances. We can't balance the world first. So yeah, I agree. And yes.
Yeah, I like to think of it sort of like, when you give a 16-year-old the keys to the car. For me, anyway, I don't know if you have the same experiences, but when you first get that kind of initial freedom, you want to just blast the radio, you want to drive everywhere, you drive a little bit more recklessly until the first time you get into a little bit of trouble, you get pulled over for speeding, whatever the situation is. Then you're like, all right, cool, let me rein this in a little bit. Once you've been driving for 25, 30 years, you start to calm down a little bit, and it's not that exciting to, speed through a stop sign and blast music and drive like a crazy person. The world that we live in right now, especially with social media and AI and all the things that are going on right now, we're very much still in that adolescent phase where we're starting to kind of get, the repercussions of our actions shown to us, right? Where we're starting to realize, hey, we can't continue on this path. So I very much agree that the pendulum is starting to swing. I don't think it's as close to center yet as I'd like it for it to be.
No.
But I'm starting to, see some initial movement. And again, I think the conversations like this, start to, even if it impacts one person, and even if the one person is one of us, right? Even if you or I now start to go out and have a slightly better day, where we can show up and make space for somebody else that we see at the drive-through or whatever the situation is, when we can show up as more present people and be that space and grace for somebody else because we've independently handled our own, right? We've done the work for ourselves. Now we start to shift that pendulum even faster. And that's when we get into this rising tide lifts all boats scenario. But it starts with us, right? We have to be willing to take responsibility of, hey, I'm in the driver's seat of my own life. No one's going to come save me, right? Yeah, there's going to be people to help you, but ultimately you have to be the one to take responsibility. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Well, and I think that speaks to Mahatma Gandhi saying, well, I don't think he technically said it this way, but be the change that you wish to see in the world. Because we point our fingers so often saying, this needs to change, that needs to change. But the question is, who am I? If I want peace, if I want justice, if I want fairness or equanimity, am I being that person? Am I being fair? Am I showing up with integrity? Am I that person? Because we point fingers all day long and we don't like what we see. It's not going to change till we change.
Yeah.
So, until you can look in the mirror and make the change yourself, you may as well just settle for what you see. So.
It's very true. And, you get into a lot of situations where, people are going to say, yeah, but I'm not doing it until this person does that, or yeah, but this. And, the thing I like to say is external conditions don't change responsibility. Like, just
Ooh, I
because
like
this
that.
or that happened, it doesn't change your responsibility to do the thing for yourself. You could blame, there's always going to be something else or somebody else to blame, but you are the one who has to be responsible for your life.
Say that one more
There's
time.
always going to be something else.
External.
External conditions don't change responsibility.
Okay, I like that.
You're welcome to that too.
I'm going to take it.
All yours. But yeah, I think that's the thing that a lot of people need to realize. And I do believe that we're starting to kind of open our eyes to that, right? And realize, hey, everybody has their own self-interest in mind.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I wish people cared about each other a little bit more. But at the end of the day, you have to be responsible for yourself. And I think people are starting to open their eyes to the fact that, we are being a little manipulated into serving someone else's vision. You talk about, hey, if you're not going to identify your destination, who you are, your authentic self, you're going to be a cog in the machine of somebody else's operation. It is what it is.
Yep. Yep.
Right? But you ultimately have control over whether you decide to stand up today and say, hey, I'm going to live today for me. And it's not selfish, not in the traditional definition of selfishness, which we think is a bad thing. Right? It's akin to, hey, when the oxygen mask drops down in the airplane, you put your own on first so that you can be good to serve other people. Right? That's the thing that people need to realize. This is not selfish as in, I only care about me and I'm doing this because I don't care about Heather on the other side of the screen. No. If I can be the best version of me, not only do I set a standard for other people to witness, but I can also then show up and pour out and give space and grace to you. And that's the thing that we need to start exercising and being the example for other people.
I think that's the distinction. Like, as I was listening to you say that, I think that you said that at the end, which I think is important to point out, is when you are living for yourself, it's not, I need to get mine. It's not the physical living for myself. It's the living for yourself, like you said, to be the best version of myself, and really understanding what that looks like for yourself. Like, what is the best version of myself when I am honest about something that maybe has a negative impact on somebody, but I'm honest, so I get to stay in integrity, and I'm not doing it because I don't love you and care about you. I'm doing it because I need to stay in integrity. And I guess I just wanted to make sure that anybody listening understood that when we're talking about that selfishness, it's the selfishness of making sure that we are staying in a place. And honestly, integrity, I think, is the only word that describes that we are staying in integrity, because that is staying in alignment with the authentic self. And frankly, I personally believe anybody's authentic self is always vying for love and acceptance and peace and compassion. I do think that is our fundamental state of existence. I think that gets distorted in how we translate it sometimes. But yeah, I think that's just the only thing I wanted to make sure anybody listening is like, yeah, it's selfish, being selfish in a way that when I'm my best version, the world gets the best version of me. They get the best outcome. Right. So.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to again thank you for this conversation, because it has been a true pleasure to have this conversation. Now, honestly, I don't know if this is what we really intended to talk about, but this has been an amazing conversation. So I'm glad that this is the way this conversation went. And I'm also really glad that these are the way these conversations go, raw and organic and authentic, and not, hey, let me read you a list of questions, because that we don't get the pure version of ourselves. We don't give each other permission to really be free and conversational. And I think that that's, when we start to show up as our best selves, when we're not worried about checking the box or kind of fitting into the mold. And I think if this conversation has proved anything, it's that really good stuff happens when we just show up and be authentic.
Am I allowed to ask a question that's totally off topic?
You can ask whatever you like.
I cannot help but notice that your tongue is a little bit blue.
It is blue, yes.
And I'm wondering what you ate.
That is odd.
That makes your tongue blue.
Yes. So I will sometimes experiment with my health, not in a weird way, but methylene blue. I don't know if you've heard of this at all
No,
or not, but it's sort of on the fringe of science at this point. But some people think that you're an absolute crazy person for consuming, clothing dye is basically what it is. But there are some proven scientific benefits from it. I literally had my first dose of it this morning, did not realize how blue it would turn my entire mouth. I probably would not have done it right before this episode, but, again, real life, here we are. I do legitimately feel a little bit more on, if that makes sense.
What does it do? Like, what is it made of? Is it made from a plant?
No, it's legitimately clothing dye. It was developed, I believe, in the 70s originally for that purpose. But what it actually does is it works to basically reactivate your mitochondria inside of your body.
Really?
So kind of on the cellular level, it basically turns on the power where otherwise it might not necessarily be on full blast. It's shown positive effects in like regenerating your skin and all the different cellular health. It's still very much on the fringe of whether people think you're an absolute crazy person or whether you're on the cutting edge of being super healthy. So I am again going first and trying to figure out, hey, does it work for me? So yeah,
is it
day
organic?
1 today? So I guess. To be honest with you, I don't necessarily know its true makeup.
Methylene blue. Okay, well, I'll be Googling it after this because I try plenty of things too. Always looking for something. So
yeah, so I'm a big believer in essentially running experiments on yourself, not in like a super crazy way, but I like to try one new thing every couple weeks, figure out, hey, did this tweak help or hurt? And I think you give it 10, 14 days is a pretty good time to isolate and think, hey, did this independently help or hurt kind of how I'm feeling? And then you kind of just stack on and level up to the next one. So this is the current experiment. I look like a Smurf.
Now I want to know. I want to know on the other side of this after your 2 weeks are up, just out of curiosity. But it's like you said, and like we've talked about this whole time, is the same thing doesn't always work for the same person. So, there might be a percentage of the population that it works fantastic for, and other people have adverse reactions. So who knows? But no, I always experiment with things too. So you're not alone, and probably I imagine a lot of your listeners are in the same boat. So you're probably going to have a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to be willing to go first and find out, hey, does it make sense? And also have the honest conversation, because there are going to be people who are very pro this thing because they probably stand to make some money on it from an affiliate sale or whatever the case may be, or they're very against it because of somebody who promotes it who they just don't like as a person. This is the world we live in. So, I think we have to be able to be willing to make our own determinations and say, hey, does this make sense for me?
Amen.
To be able to do the unbiased research and try it out. So, yeah, that's the answer to your question.
Okay. Well, thanks. Sorry for calling you out on it.
No, that's okay. Again, as authentic as humanly possible is this conversation. So,
well, and I felt a little
I'm all for it.
I felt obligated to ask it because I'm sure if anybody's watching this later, they're going to be like, why is his tongue blue? And now they'll know.
Oh, yeah. I didn't realize it would be as blue as it was. My whole mouth was blue originally, but I tried to toothbrush and mouthwash that out before we got on here. Because, my teeth were like bright blue. So now I know.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you. I appreciate your candor.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. So again, now that we've established all of that, I do want to thank you, A, for your service, B, for this conversation, and your willingness to share. It has been a true honor to have this conversation, and I truly appreciate it. Where can people follow up with you if they choose to do so?
My website is probably the best place. I've taken a little sabbatical from social media myself. I do have a Facebook page that can kind of give you some information at Yield to Evolve, but yield2evolve.com is my website. You can pretty much find anything there. You can find out how to communicate with me there. Yeah. And my biggest thing for people is I'm not looking for people to come to me for any answers. I try to provide as much as I can on my website, that if the concept of the four elements speaks to them and they want to kind of pursue that journey, they can get the book. I have some short tutorials trying to explain it in language that is actionable for them, especially like, how do I actually start kind of untangling some of this. They can find all of that information there. And I honestly, I'm pretty open. You can reach out to me with whatever. My intention is never to be like, yes, you need to become my client for the next 5 years for this to work. My intention is find
Right.
what you need and then find the actual thing that's going to help you. So, but yes, and I can't
Perfect.
thank you enough, Jim. Actually always, I love when people are capable of holding this space to have a conversation that is so natural, that it feels so natural. And so thank you for that. Thank you for the invitation. Um, yeah, I'm excited. And
My
honestly,
pleasure.
if you think of it, I would love to hear your final thoughts on, well, at the end, when you're done with your experiment, I'd love to know if it actually works for you. So,
Certainly will do.
okay.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jim.
Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity today, for our guest Heather, for sitting down and having this conversation, and for putting it in between the ears of the person who needs to hear this, so that they may have the sense of grace bestowed upon them to feel comfortable in sharing their mess and letting it turn into a message. Because you've designed them with this certain life, and even though things may not make sense in the moment, that you have a bigger plan for us, and continuing to wake us up in the morning with breath in our lungs and hope in our heart, so that we may continue to pursue our best self, not for our own glory, but for yours. Father, I ask that you continue to put us in positions which we may not find comfortable, so that we may continue to be more of who you designed us to be. So we may not rest on what we deem as comfortable, but continue to pursue the absolute best version as you have given unto us. Father, we ask all these things in your name. Amen. I love you.